the human performance field hasn't really been updated in 30 or 40 years. And most of the gurus in that field are at the late end of retirement, we'll say. And what we want to do at Radcom is revitalize, we want to humanize it and modernize the human performance field. And that gets me excited.
Let's discover what people are building in the greater Cleveland community. We are telling the stories of Northeast Ohio's entrepreneurs, builders, and those supporting them. Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the real pleasure of speaking with Angie Dianetti, the president and driving force behind Radcom, a company specializing in performance improvement consulting, which Angie founded back in 1996. And under Angie's guidance, Radcom has earned the distinction of a Weatherhead 100 Outstanding Growth Company 7 times over, since then as one of Northeast Ohio's fastest growing companies that Angie has successfully navigated through various challenges over the years, spanning the dot-com bubble burst, offshoring, reshoring, the Great Recession, the pandemic, and more. Angie is fervent about assisting business leaders in fostering a performance culture where engaged employees adhere to high standards and hold themselves accountable. And with a unique combination of training expertise and technical documentation know-how, for more than 20 years, Angie and her team at Radcom have helped clients do just this and solve their most pressing problems by empowering their teams to carry out their jobs more efficiently, drive positive results, and infuse continuous innovation into their daily lives. Today, we are also joined by guest co-host Dan Eisenberg, a familiar name from Lay of the Land's 112th conversation with Daniel Hampu, the president of the Burden D. Morgan Foundation. Dan, a professor at Columbia Business School and a former Harvard Business School professor, is the founder of Scalerator Northeast Ohio. Dan and Angie's paths intersected in 2021 when Angie enrolled in the Scalerator Northeast Ohio program designed to support organizations with sales between $5 million and $15 million in navigating growth and scaling challenges. Angie's passion for her business is inspiring, and it was a pleasure to delve deeper into Radcom's evolution, driven by Angie's adaptability and resilience. I hope you all enjoy our conversation with Angie Dianetti right after a brief word from our sponsor. Lay of the Land is brought to you by Impact Architects and by 90. As we share the stories of entrepreneurs building incredible organizations in Cleveland and throughout Northeast Ohio, Impact Architects has helped hundreds of those leaders, many of whom we have heard from as guests on this very podcast, realize their own visions and build these great organizations. I believe in Impact Architects and the people behind it so much that I have actually joined them personally in their mission to help leaders gain focus, align together, and thrive by doing what they love. If you too are trying to build great, Impact Architects is offering to sit down with you for a free consultation or provide a free trial through 90, the software platform that helps teams build great companies. If you are interested in learning more about partnering with Impact Architects or by leveraging 90 to power your own business, please go to ia.layoftheland.fm. The link will also be in our show notes. So Angie, I'd love to begin our conversation by really just hearing about what motivated you to start a company around this problem of technical writing and documentation in the first place. You have such an eclectic background from petroleum engineering to banking. You know, what transpired looking back on those early days leading up to the creation of Radcom that inspired this jump?
You know, there's a couple things. One, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. So being in business is just a natural thing and something my husband and I had just kind of always assumed would be part of our future. My dad started his first company as a young, probably older teenager, started in landscaping. And by the time I was born, he had trucks and employees and all kinds of stuff. And then he shifted completely out of that industry into the oil and gas industry, which is where the petroleum engineering degree came from. But really starting Radcom was really a very classic E-Myth type story of a technician wanting to get out from underneath others. We can do it better. So not a whole lot of thought at that point went into solving a business problem.
Well, maybe help us set the stage here so that we can all follow along as to, what technical documentation and technical writing actually is. What is the nature of this problem? How has it evolved over time? And what were the ways in which you envisioned that you could do it better?
Sure. So technical communication is very much just communicating complex technical ideas. So early on, we're in the late 90s, there was a lot of that kind of work, and we did it, as because we could do it cheaper. We almost were like independent contractors, having come from working for other companies where the documentation was very much an add-on. So if you're writing software, you need a help file. If you are developing product, you need user documentation, those kinds of things. But the problem is there wasn't a whole lot of respect for the technical writer. And what always happened on those kinds of projects is the product launch date never changed, but as development got overruns and overruns and overruns, and then your time to produce the documentation got shorter and shorter and shorter. And we were hoping, I think, to be able to provide a little more respect for the tech writer and look for opportunities to sell it where it wasn't just an add-on to something else. So we did a lot of standard operating procedures, did a lot of ISO documentation in the early days. So, but that was early Radcom. Every time there has been, as you know, since 1996 when we started, and today, the economy has been a roller coaster. And my philosophy has always been, let's look at our skills and what we have. Let's look at what the market needs today and figure out how we can leverage what we already do to solve today's needs. So we very much started off in .com, help files, things like that. We worked in manufacturing, medical device, and then things got offshored. And then we moved to financial services. We started adding, so we changed industries. We changed our service offering to add in instructional design. So we were doing training and then train the trainers. Then we added web-based training first before e-learning was named e-learning. And then, like over COVID, we did a lot of what is called VILT, which is virtual instructor-led training. Because that was a big need. All of a sudden, you can't bring people into a training room. We got busy doing that also after 9/11 because travel's done. You can't bring people into training. So how do you take exercises designed for a classroom and do them online? So now what we're looking at is the tech comm industry has gotten very commoditized. And when you've got things like Fiverr out there, you can go get a tech writer or instructional designer independent for a lot of your needs. We've got a lot of offshoring. So you want e-learning developed. Well, it's a lot cheaper to develop it with programmers in India. You've got artificial intelligence and chat HPT that will soon be able to do a large chunk of the heavy lifting of tech comm. And so once again, I've looked at what are the skills that we have and what can we do to get out of this commodity land. And so we are now focusing very heavily on human performance improvement, because two of the biggest solutions to human performance problems in the workplace are documentation, standard operating procedures, and training. Because employers want to fix their people, but only 11% of performance problems can actually be solved by training. So we're going in that direction. We're developing intellectual property. It's really fun stuff. And I will say, I'll give the Scalerator a plug now. That was the beginning of my transformation. And part of it was from Daniel's book, too, Worthless, Impossible, Stupid, I think it was called. Because I'm a nerd, I had to read the books of all the professors before I started Scalerator. So, just because that's just what I do. But I finally feel like an entrepreneur as opposed to a business owner. And that was a big aha for me. I have, for 26 years, or 25, because I think I started a few years ago now, making the transition from business owner to entrepreneur, where I'm actually looking to finally create something that doesn't exist, not just collect a paycheck as my own boss.
It's a fascinating distinction there, one that I actually don't think I've heard as explicitly as that. You introduced a lot of threads there that I want to pull on, and hopefully we can circle back to all of them, from your culture of adaptability and resilience over time as the technology world just evolves. I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned early on, though, which was about just respect for documentation. And that actually resonated a lot, because I've come to believe that mature companies who really have their stuff together need to have enough of this foundational process, infrastructure, documentation in place so that all hell does not break loose if those who are leading the organization need to take a little time off, for example. And one of the real challenges I experienced building my own company was around this idea exactly. After we had closed on our first capital and we're able to grow the team from 10 to 40 people, I constantly was thinking about this problem that 80% of the company has only been at the company for less than 6 months. And so you have this vast majority of people who you're trying to get onboarded and empowered to do their best work. And they in an ideal world need to have unrestricted access to the institutional knowledge that is just dormant in the minds of the people who have just happened to have been there longer, and understand the history and why decisions were made the way they were and how it all works. And so often it really came down to documentation as this point of empowerment. And so when you talk about respect, like, I've learned the hard way, I think, and I have this deep respect now for those who have good practice around this. I think that from the hard way. How do you get entrepreneurs, companies to overcome that reservation of prioritizing documentation over the competing priorities?
First of all, documentation is, and you say it that way, we're going to prioritize documentation, it's going to bore everybody. No. So, except for maybe a few of us, technical writers, engineers who really get into it. But the reality is, you actually hit on it more with it's the revolving doors that companies have right now. That's not going to get better. Because when you look at those average numbers, you are actually looking at people like me have been doing the same thing for 30 years, are in those averages. If you look at it generationally, each generation is their longevity in a job is shorter and shorter and shorter. And companies who want to have staying power, the tremendous amount of cost in wasted labor and wasted human resources, that's why you do this. It's not, you have to flip it off of the expense side of things and make it a strategic move that a company is making. So if when we start in on a project, we start with a company that's got a performance problem. We got a call from a company that our people, please come update our standard operating procedures because our people aren't following them. This is not, your problem is not updating the procedures. I'm happy to update them. But the problem is, let's look at what's going on in your environment. Performance problems, 80% of performance problems are incentives, environment, it's feedback loops, all of those things. So we've gotten to the point now where, yeah, we'll do your operating procedures. We'll document this stuff for you. But let's back it up first. And let's say, what does your employee need to produce? Not what do they need to do, not behaviors, none of that. What is, you look at the business results, and then you look at a position and what are the outcomes that position is. So if I'm an employer, I am paying you to produce this result for me. And let's get rid of the mutual mystification of what it is you are expected. Very few employees actually come to work wanting to do a bad job. So if we tell them, here's the expectations, and then we are also then developing tools for the managers to manage to that output sheet. So matter of fact, one of my employees is speaking, I think maybe even today at the ISPI conference. ISPI is the International Society for Performance Improvement. And her topic is goodbye job descriptions, hello performance profiles. So a job description, first of all, typically describes a person, not the actual job. So let's dig into the job. What are the outputs? And then once you have the outputs, you back up what are the behaviors. And then you back up a step further and define what the behavior influences are to put a holistic package of how to succeed.
This is great. I love the framing of human performance improvement. And it sounds like that's huge. Can you give us an idea of the market? Who are your customers? How do they find out about you? And then how big is the opportunity?
So that is the part that we are still working on. So traditionally, I have sold to the $1 billion and up companies. And that's where it's become commoditized. So we are putting this.
Can you drop any names for us?
Trying to think which ones I are contractually allowed to say. Utility in Northeast Ohio, a international construction company. So right now we are actually targeting a much smaller market, and because we've put this together in a way that we can develop value very inexpensively. So we are now targeting 25 million to 250 million. Mostly currently in manufacturing, but the reality is anybody who has employees can do this, and we can get started relatively inexpensively, and the ROI, it in theory is great. We've only done so far about 10 of these projects, but it is growing, and we're working on getting those metrics so that we'll be able to show the actual dollars and cents ROI. But the one client we did work for, it was a Northeast Ohio company, and we just did a performance analysis that showed that this was the company that wanted us to update their standard operating procedures. We still haven't done their standard operating procedures because our report showed them about 15 other things that would cost less than $5,000 to fix all of them, and we're going to have an amazing impact on the rework they were having to do, all those kinds of things. We don't have enough longevity on it. Part of our process is to start capturing these metrics now that we are doing documentation training with a performance improvement mindset and filter.
It sounds, when you said it's a smaller market, I assume what you meant is that it's a market that's made of smaller customers.
That is what I meant. Yes, it is actually a much larger market.
Yeah, well, the market must be huge. It sounds like a multi-billion-dollar opportunity.
I would love to have that dream come to fruition while I'm still young enough to enjoy it.
So I'm curious, as you have made this transition in your, perception of yourself as a business owner to an entrepreneur, as Radcom as a company has evolved in its offerings and kind of, worked on its adaptability through different offerings over time, knowing that it's constantly evolving, the offering, the market. How do you describe Radcom today, just as an organization? And we can, work our way backwards to understand how it's evolved.
We are a performance improvement consulting company. We help business leaders get the most out of their employees so that you, as a business leader, can get back to doing what you do best and you're not solving people problems all the time.
Sounds simple.
It does. But the nature of those problems, as you've suggested, changes over time.
Right. And part of it, where it's been a challenge for us with this new way of thinking, has been people, the companies that we've helped so far in this world have come to us from different aspects. One has a production problem. Several of the projects that we've done are really more what we are terming career pathing problems. So you had a municipality that needed to differentiate. All of their workers were called service technicians. I don't know if that's actually it, but we'll just use that. But they had multiple pay levels. So you had actually in that you had service technicians 1, 2, and 3, which is what they have now, which each had different things, different outputs that were expected of them. So now their staff, they take those job performance profiles, and I'm a service tech 1. Here's what I need to do to be a service tech 2. Here's what I need to be a service tech 3. And you can then provide coaching and training on how to get all those competencies. So it's, instead of starting with training as a solution, we're starting with what do you need to be able to do? And then also fixing then what training we would give those people, instead of it being what do they need to know? It's what do they need to do? Because most corporate training today is very tight on what do people need to know, and can you repeat back to me what I just told you 5 minutes ago? And that's it's a waste of time and resources. And instead, let's develop training where people can actually practice the skills that they need to be able to do.
So I want to, piggyback on what Jeff was asking about. You've gone through some really significant transitions. I don't know if it feels that way to you, but it sounds that way to us. And one is from an owner to an entrepreneur. Another one is from a few big customers to lots of smaller, medium-sized customers, and from a documentation company, which sounds, as you say, sounds boring if I can say it, even though it may not be, but to a human performance improvement company, which sounds really exciting. You also went through a 6-month program, the Scalerator, which we've done quite a few times here in Northeast Ohio with over 70 companies and $500 million of revenues. In what way did the Scalerator help you facilitate that transition? What were some of the takeaways from that?
So I think, we did a real deep dive on our clients, what they wanted, what they needed was part of it. The biggest things I personally got out of Scalerator is I tended to ignore kind of the free money on the table of so because of Scalerator, I decided to go ahead and get the ERTC funding. And I did the PPP loans earlier, but I don't need that. Everything looks good. And because of the encouragement of the group, I went ahead and did it. And so we are in a really solid cash position that we would not have been in if I had not followed that advice of looking for cash in places. I also gave me the courage when business started to slow down post-COVID for us, because people start bringing their people back in the office and economy, we always tend to follow a little bit behind other people's dips. So, we're good when the economy first starts going, but then when it starts going back up is when we start to struggle a little bit. But because of Scalerator, I really focused on capacity and building. In the past, when things would start to shrink, we would, let's just lay everybody off and get real small. And instead I said, you know what? We've got great people. We've got this idea that I think is as you called it, $1 billion idea, Daniel. So, that I felt was $1 billion ideal, and something that was going to, I'm 61 years old. I was like, I told everybody I got one more recession in me and then I'm out. But now I have something that's actually worth building for, something that's going to have my company have value beyond my retirement date. And I think that came from not even necessarily the learning and scalerator, although that is good. I think it came, though, it's those peer-to-peer relationships. I still get together with Kirk Lintern all the time. And as I've been developing this service offering, he's been my gut check for it throughout. So that is the real value of Scalerator to me.
When you think about Radcom projecting into the future, as you've done there, what ultimately is the impact that you're hoping to have with this organization? What does success look like?
Success, in a lot of ways, I feel like I've already had success because I've built a really awesome organization of people who hold themselves accountable. We run the business on EOS, which is traction, and I moved this year strictly into the visionary seat. So I have people who just do their jobs. We've built a lot of this performance system into our own organization. So it is, I've built what I set out to build originally. Now with the performance stuff, I love the fact that this can actually help every business scale. You can't scale unless you have these things. What stops most businesses from scaling is the business owner who's doing everything. And so, but if you can get them to sit down with you and say, how do you do this? Why do you do this? What we call an exemplary performer is, you look at the person who's doing it well, and let's figure out how to replicate that. And you move the whole performance curve up. And whether it's the business owner that's the high performer, and you need them to be able to let go and go do business owner things so the rest of us can so we can scale this thing, because you can't scale on yourself. Or if it's a manager that needs to, you're growing and you no longer can do everything you did before, but you need other people to pick up what you used to be able to do. We can go in and help build that so that you don't have to worry about it being done right or well. So that, and if every company in Northeast Ohio or the world would do that, employers are happier, you're building wealth. It's just an amazing thing. The human performance field hasn't really been updated in 30 or 40 years. And most of the gurus in that field are at the late end of retirement, we'll say. And what we want to do at Radcom is revitalize. We want to humanize it and modernize the human performance field. And that gets me excited.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, it is very exciting. Again, a few questions as a follow-up here, but my sense is that relinquishing those responsibilities as a business owner, delegating, it truly might be one of the hardest things that happens, as you mentioned, as the bottleneck to scale. How do people typically navigate that transition of being able to let go of what maybe they are not, they're used very much to being in full control of that situation?
Part of it is not trusting that anybody else can do it right, that nobody else can do it as well as you can. Nobody else cares as much. And the reality is, it's partially because as managers, entrepreneurs, we think we're really clear on our expectations. And we think that everybody sees our vision, but we're really bad at actually communicating and helping people to see the vision. So, these kind of tools help get rid of that, what I call the mutual mystification of what success looks like in a job. But it goes both ways, because it's, the one key thing I would ask an entrepreneur is what, and in EOS, we call it letting go of the vine. What do you need to be able to let go of the vine? Because that's what an entrepreneur needs. They need to be able to trust and know that it's handled before they can say, I don't need to handle it. And one of the biggest things we tend to do when something goes wrong is, instead of fixing what went wrong, fix the process, provide more resources, whatever, what do we do as entrepreneurs? We jump in and try to save the day and fix it. And if you cannot scale a business, if that's what you do.
Yeah. It hurts. I've experienced this pain and problem. I've made that mistake.
I don't know if this is true for you as well, Jeff. For me, it's also the flip side, which is I'm afraid that people will be doing it at least as well as I do it, and maybe even better. And so who needs me?
And my experience is, if you hire well and you provide these things, Daniel, that is exactly what will happen. And it's a beautiful thing when you let go of something and you let somebody else take it on, who has now time to 100% focus on just that piece, instead of the ADHD-ness of most entrepreneurs. Now, all of a sudden, somebody who is good at it and has time to focus on it, they will do a better job. But what I've also found is, I also then do a better job on the stuff I've kept, because I'm not bothered by having to worry about those things.
How often are people that you're working with coming to you from a proactive place versus one where they know they are having a problem and they need your help in retrospect?
Usually it's when something bad happens is when they finally decide that this needs my attention and focus to solve it. And it will be, right now it's sometimes the guy who's been here for 40 years is retiring and nobody knows what Joe knows, and they're panicked. Or, there will be customer complaints. And so they start looking into seeing what's, why is their product quality control bad? We got to fix this because we're losing orders. We're having to pay for rework. We are a lot of material waste, which is why manufacturing is where we are kind of focusing a lot of our work, because it's easier to see and measure the cost of not having this. But in any industry, it's time to proficiency for the employees when you have high turnover. It's all the good people are leaving, and there is, because they aren't seeing a career path for themselves. They don't see a future for them at our company. Those are the kinds of problems that clients have come to us for. But usually it is not proactive, no.
Yeah. That I didn't imagine it would be, but
if it were, I would definitely have a waiting list.
As you also have gone to market, you mentioned earlier, an avoidance of the commodity part of the business. As you've transitioned to the work you're doing now, what does competition look like in this space, and how do you think about differentiation?
There really isn't much, certainly not locally. There is not much. There are a few other companies that are in the performance arena, but there's so much work that I don't really haven't figured out if there's even a need to come up with a specific differentiator for it. I think the plan is to, if it does become a grow, because if it's really popular, this could, everybody else and their brother might start doing it. It's developing the intellectual property, our own process. I haven't gotten the trademarks and patent stuff yet because I haven't developed it solidly enough to go there, but that is the plan.
It's interesting because It's not often. There's just not competition. Why do you think that is?
I think we've always in Radcom had very little competition in what we actually do. We have competition in little areas, like so when we developed e-learning. There's a bazillion e-learning companies out there, so there's competition in that little piece. But we also do instructor-led training, and so there's competition in that little piece. We do standard operating procedures, tech writing, so there's that little piece. What differentiated us in that world is we did a holistic approach to your documentation and training, not just whiz bang, really cool e-learning with lots of bells and whistles that doesn't actually train anybody in anything, but it looks cool. That is how we've differentiated it in the past. So the performance, there, like I said, there are a few companies. There are companies that call themselves performance based. Many of them are learning companies, but looking at it as learning isn't the only solution. And it, as I said, it only solves the problem 11% of the time. So we're trying to build out all of the other things. Let's get the coaching and the feedback systems and all of these other pieces. Let's make sure you're incenting people properly, because often incentive programs are so convoluted that people don't. If people can't use your incentive program to actually adjust their behaviors and actions, then it's useless.
When you talk about human performance improvement, it sounds something very tangible. If I'm a company, I come to you because you're actually going to improve the performance of my people. That's like, wow, right? Do you actually measure the impact of what you do on their performance?
We are working on that. The problem is that most of the clients don't have measures. But so the first thing we ask, and this goes because they usually come to us with they want us to train, or they want us to write standard operating procedures. And that's probably because from 26 years of marketing that way. But that's what we're known for. But it's also, the mindset is, for many, is I got to fix my people. So they'll come to us with that kind of a mindset. So, what we are looking at is, do they do it right sometimes? If they're doing something right sometimes, it's not a knowledge problem. If they're not doing it right, why aren't they doing it? And we look at the holistic picture. So what we will ask them is, if right now your performance is X and you want to get it to Y, but most of them don't know the X yet. So what we're starting to do is to help build that in as, all right, let's start with, what is the X today? What do you need it to be? And let's look at, how do we move from X to Y? Will you be Stephen Covey, X to Y by when?
Right. No, I mean, it makes sense. You can't really measure improvement if you can't measure at all.
Often there's this vague idea that that I'm not getting what I need to be getting, but it's getting them to sit down and say, okay, are you measuring what you need to be getting? And the smaller the companies, the harder that conversation is, because the big companies are used to measuring. So that's been a challenge.
As you reflect on the whole journey so far of building, Radcom, you'd mentioned somewhat of the vision at the onset was, we can do this better, cheaper. How has your thinking on it evolved? What has surprised you about the evolution of Radcom over time that you didn't anticipate when you started?
Well, when I started, I never really thought that I would be not actually doing writing anymore. That was a part of it. I think the complexity of being in business was something that I never really thought about as getting started, and all of the things that means, and how hard it is to know all of that stuff, how lonely sometimes being the owner can be, the boss. But as far as the growing of the business, I think it's the resiliency of the being flexible. We would not be in business today if we weren't able to be flexible and always be looking for what does the customer need today, because it's not ever going to be what they needed yesterday.
Yeah. I would be remiss also, I think, if I didn't ask, having worked with so many companies across so many different industries on this core problem of training and documentation and improvement just overall, do you find that there's just generally low hanging fruit that, if folks listening in can apply to their own business, that is likely maybe something they're not thinking about that they could?
I think probably the most important thing is start with your business results and take the position that you feel is the least productive, that's not getting you the results that you think it needs, and get down and dirty clear about what that function it needs to be providing to your organization, and then step back and figure out, well, how do we get that? So if it's a sales team and you need your sales team to be bringing in X number of new deals per quarter at a certain volume, and they're not and that's not happening, you got to dig in and look at what are that's the deliverable. Now let's look at what are the sub outcomes for each of those things, and just dig in and make sure you have a process, because we too often just kind of hope it happens.
So it's understanding success criteria.
Yep.
What does it look like to be successful
in any given role? And all
role.
Those roles need to roll up to the business needs. Often you'll have just a story. You got a factory, and yet different production lines. Okay, and the line 1 produces something that has to go to line 2, and line 2 is producing for a product for the customer. So line 1 is hitting all their numbers, and you're stockpiling all those parts at the end of line 1. But line 2 has a different priority and is waiting for another part from another department, and can't use all of those things that line 1. So line 1 is highly productive organization. Line 2 is not producing, but it has not. So you've built up all this waste of these products that line 1 is producing with nowhere for them to go, sitting in your inventory, when your real problem is fixing line 2's supply problem so that they can start moving again. And it's not a performance issue. It's not, well, why are they producing 1,000 units an hour and you're not producing 10? Well, again, it's a system. Business is a system. We have to look at it as a holistic system.
So before we kind of bookend the conversation here, I want to leave some space for you to touch on anything that you think is important as part of your journey, as part of building Radcom that we haven't necessarily talked about yet.
One of the things I think that's been really important for us is building the culture. We have a really amazing culture program. Everybody is very, very involved in it. It really has helped be able to let go, because I know I've got all the right people. They live our values, but we don't just live our values. We make it part of we celebrate our values. I think that's the key. We celebrate people's successes. We recognize people based on their values, and that has been huge.
I like the framing of culture as how the people in the organization might make decisions.
That's
if
the
you're
whole
not
point.
In the room, right?
It's the whole point of culture. And culture gets a froofy. It is probably the most important thing as a business owner that you can do, is make sure that you have the culture, because you have a culture whether if you've named it or not. be intentional about it. And it has been a game changer.
Elaine Eisenman, one of the faculty, you probably remember, Angie, defines culture in part as what people do when no one's watching.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Angie, I'll ask you our traditional closing question, which has very little to do with anything that we've talked about so far, but is a fun one, which is for not necessarily your favorite thing in Northeast Ohio and Cleveland, but for a hidden gem, something that other folks may not know about.
There's so many. The microbrewery culture. I mean, Northeast Ohio has, I think, 60 microbreweries, maybe more. I mean, Cincinnati has us beat, but not by much. And Ohio is number 5 in the country for microbreweries. So I like to visit all of the local ones as much as I can.
Yeah, no, they're great. I share that sentiment. They're all over the place.
They are all over the place, and more entrepreneurship in Cleveland, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Angie, I want to thank you again for taking the time to come on and share your story. It is a fascinating one, and I really enjoyed getting to listen in.
It's been a lot of fun.
If people had anything that they wanted to follow up with you about your own journey, about Scalerator, about Radcom, or otherwise, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Well, LinkedIn is always good, A. Dianetti. My email address is adianetti@radcomservices.com. And as you can probably tell, I love talking to people. So
awesome. Well, thank you, Angie, again. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Angie. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternhefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with the Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.